Emma stood at the entrance of the school, clutching her backpack tightly. Her heart raced as she looked up at the towering building in front of her. This was it. The first day of a new chapter in her life. She had been through a lot in the past few months, moving to a new city, losing her mother, and now, starting at a new school. She didn't know anyone here, and that thought alone made her stomach churn with anxiety. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "You can do this," she muttered under her breath. She wasn't the same person she was a year ago. A year ago, she would have turned and run. But today, she was different. Today, she was going to stand tall and face the world, no matter how daunting it seemed. As she stepped into the school courtyard, Emma's eyes scanned the sea of students. They were all laughing, chatting, and grouping up with their friends. She felt like an outsider, standing on the edge, unsure of where to go or who to talk to. It was like high school all over again, the same feeling of being invisible, of being on the outside looking in. "Hey, new girl," a voice suddenly called out. Emma's head snapped to the side, and her eyes met those of Jessica, the girl who seemed to command everyone's attention at the school. She was surrounded by a group of equally popular girls, all of them laughing and whispering among themselves. Jessica's eyes narrowed as she took in Emma's nervous stance. "You lost or something?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. Should she just ignore it, or should she say something back? She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone the target of someone's cruelty. Before she could respond, Jessica's friends burst into laughter. "Look at her," one of them said, "she's so awkward. Doesn't even know where to go." Emma's face flushed, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. This wasn't what she had imagined when she thought about her first day at this new school. She had hoped for a fresh start, a chance to be someone different, someone confident and brave. But now, it felt like she had just stepped right into the middle of a nightmare. She took a deep breath, pushing the tears back. She wasn't going to let them see how much their words hurt. Instead, she straightened her posture and forced a smile. "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky but steady. "I know where I'm going." Jessica's lips twisted into a smirk. "All right, if you say so," she said, rolling her eyes. She turned to her group of friends, and they all shared an exaggerated eye roll before walking away, their laughter echoing in Emma's ears. Emma stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be singled out on her first day. But as she looked around the courtyard, she noticed something else. A few students were watching the scene unfold. One or two of them looked sympathetic, while others seemed more interested in their phones than in what was happening around them. But one thing was clear, Emma had just become the target of Jessica and her friends. With a sigh, Emma made her way into the school building. The hallways were crowded, students rushing to their lockers and chatting with friends. It all felt overwhelming. She had hoped for a fresh start, but instead, it felt like she was stepping into the middle of a social battlefield. And she was the new kid, the one who didn't belong. She couldn't help but feel small and invisible. Her mind kept replaying Jessica's words. "Look at her, she's so awkward." It was like they were stuck on a loop in her brain, getting louder with each passing second. As Emma walked to her first class, she tried to push the thoughts aside. She had to focus. She had to survive this day, just like she had survived everything else. She had lost her mother. She had moved to a new city, far away from everything she had ever known. If she could survive that, she could survive anything. Right? She found her classroom and slipped inside, taking a seat near the back. The teacher, Mr. Thompson, was already talking about the syllabus for the semester. Emma wasn't really listening, her mind was still on what had just happened in the courtyard. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica and her friends were going to make her life miserable. The bell rang, signaling the start of the next period. As Emma gathered her things to leave, she spotted Jake, a guy from her history class who had smiled at her earlier in the hallway. He wasn't part of the popular crowd, but he didn't seem like the type to ignore her either. He waved at her as she walked past, and she smiled awkwardly in return. Maybe, just maybe, Emma thought, things wouldn't be as bad as she feared. Maybe there was a chance for her to make a real friend in this new school, someone who didn't care about the petty dramas or the popularity contest. As the school day dragged on, Emma kept her head down. She did her best to stay unnoticed, to blend in with the background. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, not after what had happened with Jessica. She just wanted to get through the day without anyone else making her feel small or awkward. But when the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Emma felt a strange sense of relief. She had made it through. She hadn't let them see how hurt she was. She hadn't let Jessica's words define her. "Hey, Emma," a voice called from behind her as she was heading to the exit. She turned to find Jake walking toward her, his backpack slung over his shoulder. "I know it's your first day and all, but if you want, I could show you around the school tomorrow. I know it's a bit overwhelming at first." Emma blinked in surprise. "Really? That would be nice, actually." Jake smiled, a friendly, genuine smile. "Yeah, no problem. I'll meet you here in the morning. It's nice to have someone to talk to, right?" "Thanks, Jake," Emma said, feeling a small wave of relief wash over her. Maybe this school wouldn't be so bad after all. She didn't have to face it alone. As she walked out of the school, Emma couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Yes, it had been a tough first day. Yes, Jessica and her friends had been cruel. But she wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going to let anyone bully her into hiding who she really was. She had fought through much harder things in her life, and she could fight through this too. The next day was a new day. And she was ready to face it head-on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next morning, Emma woke up with a new sense of determination. She had survived her first day, and today was going to be different. She wasn't going to let the negativity weigh her down. The morning light filtered through the curtains of her bedroom, casting soft shadows on the walls. Emma stretched and yawned, feeling the coolness of the sheets against her skin. She had a long day ahead of her, but she could handle it. She had to. As she made her way downstairs, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the house. Her aunt, Eleanor, was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug in hand. Eleanor was the one person who had been there for Emma after everything changed. After her mom had passed away, Emma had moved in with Eleanor, her mother's older sister. Emma had never been particularly close to her aunt. They had always lived in different cities, and they only saw each other on holidays or at family gatherings. But when Emma's mom passed away, everything changed. Eleanor had opened her home to her niece, giving her a place to stay, even though Emma knew it was far from easy for her aunt. Eleanor was kind, but there was always a distance between them, a wall that Emma couldn't quite break down. "Morning, Emma," Eleanor said, her voice warm but tired. She had a certain sadness about her, the kind that never seemed to leave her eyes. It was as if she carried the weight of something Emma couldn't fully understand. "Morning," Emma replied quietly, grabbing a cereal bar from the counter. She wasn't much of a breakfast person, and the silence between her and Eleanor was always thick, so she kept her words to a minimum. Emma often wondered about her mother. She had been just a kid when she passed away, only 10 years old. The memories of her mother were like fading photographs, distorted and blurry, but still there. Emma remembered the sound of her mother's voice, soft and comforting, and the smell of her mother's perfume that lingered on her clothes. But it was the little things, like the way her mother always knew how to make her feel safe, that Emma missed the most. After her mom died, Emma had moved to live with Eleanor in a city that felt colder than the one she had left behind. Everything felt different here, the streets, the people, the air. It was as if she had stepped into a different world, one where everything seemed unfamiliar, and yet, at the same time, nothing felt like home. Her aunt had tried her best to make Emma feel comfortable, but there was always an unspoken tension between them. Eleanor was kind, yes, but there was a stiffness in her movements, as if she was constantly holding back. Emma often wondered if her aunt was grieving too, but she never asked. The one thing that kept them going was the mutual understanding that both of them were lost, trying to find a new normal. "How was your second day at school?" Eleanor asked, breaking the silence. Emma shrugged, sitting down across from her aunt. "It was okay, I guess. I met a couple of people. Jake's been nice to me. He offered to show me around today." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her expression softening. "Jake, huh? He sounds like a good kid." "Yeah, he seems alright," Emma replied, unsure of how much she wanted to share. It wasn't that she didn't like Jake, he was easy to talk to, and he was the first person at school who hadn't treated her like an outsider. But something about the way he looked at her made her feel both seen and exposed at the same time. "Just be careful, alright?" Eleanor said, her voice laced with concern. "You've been through a lot, and I don't want you to get hurt again. People can be unpredictable." Emma nodded, appreciating her aunt's concern, but she wasn't sure if Eleanor fully understood. It wasn't about being careful. It was about surviving. It was about finding a way to make it through each day without losing herself in the process. The conversation shifted, but Emma's thoughts lingered on the idea of her mother. She often thought about what her mother would have said if she had been here. Would she have told Emma to stand up to the bullies at school? Would she have told her to be strong, to not let people push her around? Emma wasn't sure. She was only 10 when her mother passed away, and the gap of years between then and now seemed vast. But she did know one thing: her mother would have wanted her to fight. Not just for herself, but for the people who couldn't fight back. Emma had always been a fighter at heart, even if she hadn't known it until now. After finishing breakfast, Emma grabbed her bag and headed out the door. The walk to school was quiet, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was still that quiet girl who had never quite fit in. The girl who never spoke up, who always kept her head down and avoided conflict. But today, she promised herself, would be different. Today, she would be stronger. She met Jake at the school gates, just like he had said. He waved at her as she approached, his usual friendly smile on his face. "Ready for the tour?" he asked, adjusting his backpack strap. "Yeah," Emma replied, her voice a little more confident than before. "Let's do it." As they walked through the school together, Jake showed her the best places to hang out between classes, the shortcuts to avoid getting stuck in crowded hallways, and the spots where you could always find a little peace and quiet. Emma found herself relaxing, if only a little. Jake's presence made everything feel less intimidating. But even with Jake by her side, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there were eyes on her, watching her every move. Jessica's face kept flashing through her mind. The way she had looked at Emma with that mix of disdain and amusement, as if Emma was just another target for her cruel jokes. Emma tried to shake it off. She wasn't going to let Jessica get to her. She wasn't going to let anyone push her around again. She had her own strength, even if she hadn't fully realized it yet. The day passed in a blur. Emma tried to focus on the lessons and the things Jake showed her, but her mind kept drifting back to the idea of standing up for herself. It had been so long since she had done that. So long since she had taken control of her life. But maybe, just maybe, today would be the day she started to find her voice again. By the time the final bell rang, Emma felt a little more hopeful. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to let anyone push her down without a fight. The following days at school passed in a blur. Emma's nerves slowly settled as she adjusted to the routine. She walked through the halls with a little more confidence, and her interactions with Jake became more comfortable. They'd meet between classes and chat, and for the first time in a long while, Emma began to feel like she wasn't so alone. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the presence of Jessica and her friends was a constant weight on Emma's shoulders. Every time she entered a classroom, sat down at lunch, or walked through the halls, she could feel their eyes on her. It was a subtle thing at first, just whispers, snickers, and the occasional mocking glance, but it was enough to make Emma feel like an outsider. One afternoon, as Emma was heading to her locker, she spotted Jessica and her group gathered near the entrance. They were talking and laughing, and as soon as they saw Emma, the conversation stopped. Jessica's lips curled into a sly smile. Emma froze, her heart skipping a beat. Well, if it isn't the new girl," Jessica said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "How's life treating you, Emma? Making any new friends?" Emma stood her ground, even though her palms were sweating. She glanced at Jake, who had been walking beside her, but he hadn't noticed Jessica's group yet. He was still a few steps ahead, absorbed in a conversation with a couple of other students. Emma took a deep breath, trying not to let Jessica's words rattle her. "I'm fine," Emma said, her voice steady, though she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. Jessica stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with something almost predatory. "You know, we've all been talking. And, well, we think it's kind of funny that you've been trying so hard to fit in. You really think you belong here?" The word stung more than Emma cared to admit, and she felt the familiar sense of shame creeping in. It was like high school all over again. It didn't matter that she was different now, that she was determined to make a fresh start. There was always going to be someone who would try to tear her down. She opened her mouth to say something, anything to shut Jessica up, but before she could get the words out, Jessica's friend, Megan, chimed in, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She's just so awkward. I don't even know why she's trying. Everyone can see she doesn't fit in here." Emma felt the sting of their words like a physical blow. Her chest tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. The familiar feeling of being out of place flooded her senses, and her mind raced. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the sense of humiliation pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't shake. But then she remembered something. Something her mother had always told her. "You're stronger than you think." Emma's jaw clenched, and she lifted her chin, refusing to let them see how much their words had affected her. "I don't need to fit in with you," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I'm just fine being me." Jessica's smile faltered for a second, but then she recovered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Oh, sweetie. I think you're about to learn the hard way that you're never going to be fine here." She turned her back on Emma and walked away, her friends following close behind, throwing Emma one last look of disdain. Emma stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The humiliation burned in her cheeks, but she wasn't going to let it break her. She had learned a long time ago to swallow her tears, to stand tall no matter what people said. But as she walked to her next class, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Jessica and her friends had made it clear that they didn't like her, and it wasn't going to be easy to survive here, not if they were going to keep picking on her. The next few days followed a familiar pattern. Every time Emma entered the cafeteria, she could feel their eyes on her. They whispered behind their hands, giggled as she passed, and even made snide comments when she was just trying to enjoy her lunch. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to make Emma feel like she was walking on eggshells. She tried to brush it off, to remind herself that it didn't matter. But it did. It hurt. And no matter how hard she tried to hide it, the pressure was beginning to build. At the same time, Emma began to notice something else. There were a few students, like Jake, who seemed to genuinely want to get to know her. They weren't part of Jessica's group, and they weren't the kind of people who cared about social hierarchies. There was an odd comfort in that. But at the same time, Emma couldn't help but feel that she was being pulled in two different directions. On one hand, there were the students who accepted her for who she was, and on the other, there was Jessica, who seemed determined to break her down. One afternoon, as Emma was walking to her locker, she ran into Sarah, a girl from her biology class. Sarah had been friendly to Emma since the beginning, but Emma hadn't paid much attention to her. She had been too caught up in trying to survive the social minefield that was high school. "Hey, Emma," Sarah said with a smile, "I heard you've been dealing with some stuff. I just wanted to say, don't let Jessica get to you. She's been like that for years." Emma looked at Sarah, surprised by her words. "You know about Jessica?" Sarah laughed softly. "Everyone knows about Jessica. She's the queen bee of this school. But trust me, she doesn't have the power she thinks she does. People just go along with her because they're too scared to stand up to her." Emma felt a surge of relief. For the first time since she had started at this school, someone wasn't telling her to be careful or to avoid confrontation. Sarah wasn't telling her to back down. She was telling her to stand up. "Thanks," Emma said, her voice quieter now. "I'm just not used to this kind of thing." Sarah gave her a sympathetic smile. "I get it. But trust me, you don't have to let her win. She's just one person. You've got a lot more strength in you than you realize." As Emma closed her locker and walked out of the school building later that afternoon, she felt a flicker of something inside her, a spark of defiance. Jessica might have made it clear that she was the queen of this school, but Emma wasn't going to let her tear her down. Not anymore. She had learned from her past, from the loss of her mother, from the years of loneliness and struggle. She had learned that she was stronger than she realized. And Jessica? Well, she had just picked on the wrong girl. The days following the confrontation with Jessica were a mix of anxiety and determination for Emma. The weight of the constant whispers and sideways glances never truly disappeared, but now something was different. Emma felt a fire burning inside her that she hadn't known existed. Every sneer from Jessica, every cruel word from her friends, only fueled that fire. If they wanted to see her break, they were going to be in for a long wait. Jake noticed the change in Emma almost immediately. Their walks between classes grew more frequent, and Emma's confidence seemed to shine through with every passing day. She wasn't the same quiet girl she had been when she first walked into the school. She still felt the sting of their words, but now she knew how to fight back, not just with words, but with actions. "I'm really starting to think you're not so new here anymore," Jake teased one morning, his voice light and full of that same easy charm. Emma grinned, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, a quiet defiance. "You're right. I'm starting to get the hang of this place." They both laughed, but Emma knew it wasn't just about fitting in anymore. It was about survival. It was about proving to herself, and to Jessica, that she wasn't going to be the easy target they thought she was. That afternoon, as Emma was walking to her next class, she spotted Jessica and her friends once again. They were gathered in the hallway, laughing among themselves. Jessica caught sight of Emma before she could look away, and that familiar, condescending smirk appeared on her face. "Hey, Emma," Jessica called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You still trying to pretend you're one of us?" Emma stopped in her tracks, her pulse quickening. She could feel Jake's presence behind her, but he hadn't yet caught on to what was going on. Jessica's friends, Megan and Amanda, were snickering in the background, ready to join in if things went south. It was the same scene that had played out a dozen times before. But Emma wasn't afraid anymore. She stood taller now, her shoulders squared as she faced Jessica head-on. "You know, Jessica," Emma said, her voice steady, "you really don't know anything about me. And that's probably a good thing." Jessica's face tightened for a moment, clearly not used to being challenged. "Oh, please. You think you're special just because you've made a few friends?" Emma shook her head. "No, Jessica. I don't think I'm special. I just think I deserve the same respect you give everyone else. So maybe, just maybe, you should take a step back and realize that you don't control everything around here." The hallway fell quiet, and for a moment, Emma thought she could hear her own heart beating in her ears. It was one of the few times in her life she had ever stood up for herself so directly, and it felt like a rush. Jessica blinked, clearly taken aback by Emma's words, but instead of backing down, she sneered. "All right, new girl. You want to play that game? Fine." She turned on her heel, signaling to her friends to follow. "We'll see how long your little rebellion lasts. Trust me, it won't be long before you learn that here, you either fall in line or get crushed." Her words stung, but they didn't break Emma's resolve. As Jessica walked away, Emma exhaled, feeling like she had just fought her first real battle. She wasn't sure if she had won, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to back down. Later that afternoon, Jake caught up to Emma just before the final bell rang. "Hey, that was awesome," he said, a huge grin on his face. "I didn't know you had it in you." Emma laughed, the sound genuine for the first time in days. "Yeah, I didn't know either. But I guess we all have our breaking points, right?" Jake's smile softened, and he gave her a knowing look. "You're stronger than you think, Emma." His words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time, she really believed it. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. And if she was going to make it through high school without letting Jessica break her, she was going to have to keep believing that. But the fight wasn't over yet. In the days that followed, Emma's interactions with Jessica became more and more tense. It wasn't just the whispers and the cruel glances anymore, it was the constant taunting, the passive-aggressive comments, and the attempts to make Emma feel small. Jessica seemed determined to push her to her limit, to prove that she could never belong. But Emma refused to give in. One Friday afternoon, as the weekend loomed, Emma found herself standing at her locker when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, and there was Jessica again, flanked by her usual group. This time, though, something was different. There was a cold, almost predatory gleam in Jessica's eyes that Emma had never seen before. "You know, Emma," Jessica started, her tone lower than usual, "I've been thinking about what you said the other day. About respect. Maybe I was too harsh." Emma tensed, unsure where this conversation was headed. Jessica continued, her voice laced with fake sweetness. "So, I thought I'd give you a little advice. If you really want to make it through here, you're going to have to learn how to fight dirty. Because no one's going to give you anything. Not here." Emma's heart raced, but she didn't let her fear show. "I don't need to play your games, Jessica." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed like Jessica might push further, but then she just smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll learn. You'll see. Everyone does eventually." With that, Jessica turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Emma standing there, her heart pounding. Emma wasn't sure if this was a warning, a challenge, or a declaration of war, but one thing was clear: Jessica wasn't going to stop. But neither was Emma. She wasn't going to let Jessica's cruelty control her. Not anymore. She had learned from the past. She had learned from her mother's strength, and now it was time for Emma to show the world just how strong she really was. The journey was far from over, but Emma could feel herself growing stronger with each passing day. And whatever was coming next, she knew she wasn't going to face it alone. She had her friends, her resolve, and the unshakable belief that no one could break her, not without a fight. It had been weeks since Emma stood up to Jessica, and while the bullying hadn't ceased entirely, something had shifted. Emma was no longer the quiet, scared girl who just wanted to fit in. She wasn't the new girl who could be pushed around and ignored. No, she had become someone who was starting to command attention in a way that felt both empowering and terrifying. She had spent countless hours reflecting on her mother's lessons, on how to stand her ground, how to find her inner strength, and most importantly, how to not let others define her. But now, standing in the middle of the school hallway with Jessica's words echoing in her mind, Emma was beginning to understand just how much of a toll this battle was taking on her. Every time she thought she could finally relax, the bullies would find a new way to make her feel like an outsider. The glances, the whispers, and the petty comments had turned into something darker. It was no longer just Jessica's subtle manipulations. It was a group effort, a collective campaign to break her down. On that particular Friday afternoon, Emma was already feeling the weight of the week. She had just finished her last class and was walking to the parking lot, eager to get home and take a break from the constant tension at school. But as she passed through the courtyard, she saw Jessica, Megan, and Amanda standing by the school gates, their expressions tight with intent. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She tried to walk past them, her pace quickening, but Jessica stepped forward, blocking her path. "Where do you think you're going, Emma?" Jessica's voice was sweet, but it didn't fool anyone. "We still need to talk." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't in the mood for another round of verbal sparring. Her resolve was beginning to wear thin. "I've got nothing to say to you, Jessica," Emma replied, trying to step around her, but Jessica stepped in her way again, forcing her to stop. "Really?" Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Because I think we have a lot to say." The other girls stood by silently, watching with eager eyes, their expressions almost bored as if they had seen this play out before. Emma knew they were waiting for her to break. Waiting for her to lose control and give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Emma stood her ground, though every muscle in her body screamed for her to walk away. She had come so far. She couldn't back down now. "I'm done with your games," Emma said, her voice a little shaky but firm. "You don't scare me anymore." For a brief moment, Jessica's face darkened, the mask of arrogance slipping slightly. It wasn't much, just a flicker in her eyes, but Emma saw it, and it gave her the confidence to press on. "You really think you've won, don't you?" Jessica sneered, her tone dripping with disdain. "You think you're better than us now?" Emma stood taller, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't just standing up to Jessica anymore, she was standing up for herself, for everything she had been through, for everything she had fought for. "No," Emma said quietly, but with a clarity she had never had before. "I think I'm better than you. And I'm not going to let you control me anymore." It was a simple sentence, but it felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. It wasn't about being better than Jessica. It was about knowing her own worth. It was about realizing that no one, not even Jessica, had the power to make her feel small anymore. But just as Emma thought she had won, just as she thought the confrontation was over, Jessica's eyes narrowed, and she said something that made Emma's blood run cold. "You think you're strong? Let's see how strong you really are." Without warning, Jessica pushed Emma. The force wasn't much, but the unexpectedness of it sent Emma stumbling back. She caught herself against the brick wall, her heart racing as the anger and frustration of the past few months came crashing down on her all at once. For a brief moment, everything went quiet. Emma's mind raced, her chest tight with fear, anger, and a deep, searing hurt. She could feel the sting of the past few weeks, of being alone, of being targeted, of being misunderstood. And in that moment, she almost gave in. Almost let the anger and the shame consume her. But then, something inside her shifted. She remembered what Sarah had told her, that she didn't have to play their game. She remembered what her mom had taught her about not letting others steal her peace. With a deep breath, Emma stood up straight. Her hands shook, but she clenched her fists and looked Jessica in the eye. "Is this really who you want to be, Jessica?" Emma's voice was steady now, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Is this the person you're going to be for the rest of your life? Because I can't be that. I'm not playing this game with you anymore." Jessica's face twisted with rage, but Emma didn't back down. She didn't move an inch. She had finally realized that she didn't need to win this battle. She just needed to stand her ground, no matter what Jessica threw at her. Jessica's friends, Megan and Amanda, exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they didn't seem so sure of their queen bee's power. The air hung heavy with tension, and Emma could feel the shift in the dynamics. Jessica might have been the one who ruled the school with fear, but Emma was no longer afraid. After a long pause, Jessica straightened up, her smirk fading. "You think you've won?" Fine. Keep pretending that you're stronger than me. We'll see how long that lasts. She turned on her heel and walked away, Megan and Amanda following her reluctantly. Emma watched them leave, her heart still pounding in her chest. It wasn't a victory, not really. But it was a moment, one where she refused to let herself be broken. She had stood tall, and for the first time, Jessica hadn't gotten what she wanted. As Emma walked away, her breath still coming in shallow bursts, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Maybe there were still battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might just make it through. Her journey wasn't over, but she was stronger than she had been when she started, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The week after that explosive encounter with Jessica felt different for Emma. It wasn't just the absence of the usual mocking whispers in the hallways or the tension that usually followed her around. There was something deeper, something that changed within her. She had faced Jessica's cruelty and come out of it standing taller, stronger, more confident. But even as the days passed, Emma knew the struggle wasn't over. The road to overcoming this was still long, but she was no longer the same girl who had first stepped into this school, unsure and uncertain. Emma was starting to find her voice. Her friends noticed the change, too. Sarah had been the first to say something after the confrontation, her voice filled with admiration. "I didn't know you had it in you, Emma," she said with a grin one morning as they met for lunch. "You were on fire out there." Emma smiled, feeling both grateful and slightly embarrassed. "I don't know, Sarah. I was scared. I wasn't even sure I could do it. But I guess something just clicked, you know. I couldn't let her push me around anymore." Sarah's eyes softened, and she gave Emma's hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's more than just about standing up to her. You're showing everyone that you're strong, stronger than she'll ever be." Emma's mind wandered back to that moment in the courtyard, when Jessica had shoved her against the wall. Her body had been frozen with anger and confusion, but somehow, in the middle of it all, she had found the courage to speak up, to refuse to be afraid any longer. Jessica hadn't won that day. Emma had. But as much as Emma had come to realize her own strength, she couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on her. The constant strain of living under Jessica's watchful eye, the whispers, the stares, it wore on her. Even her relationship with Jake had begun to feel more distant. They still hung out, but their conversations, once full of easy banter, had started to turn more serious, more strained. Emma knew Jake was worried about her, and she appreciated his concern, but there was a part of her that didn't want to lean too heavily on him. She didn't want to be a burden. It wasn't until one afternoon, just before the final bell rang, that things finally started to shift. Emma was walking out of the school building, her mind still preoccupied with the ongoing tension between her and Jessica, when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she found Jake standing there, his face filled with an expression she couldn't quite place, something between concern and determination. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but with an underlying firmness. Emma hesitated. She was used to bottling things up, pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. But something about the way Jake was looking at her made her want to be honest. She needed to be honest, not just with him, but with herself. "No, Jake," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm not okay. It's been really hard. I feel like I'm carrying everything on my shoulders. I've been trying to prove that I'm strong, but I don't know if I can keep doing this. Every day it's something new with Jessica, and I'm just tired." Jake stepped closer, his eyes softening as he reached out to take her hand. "Emma, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you. You don't need to carry all of this on your own." Her throat tightened, and for a moment, she just stood there, staring at their intertwined hands, wondering how she had gotten so far without realizing that she didn't have to face everything by herself. "I know you are," she replied, her voice cracking slightly. "But it feels like no matter how much I fight, she just keeps coming at me. It's like I'm not allowed to have peace." And I don't know if I can keep fighting without losing myself. Jake's gaze softened even more, and he took a small step back, studying her face. You're not going to lose yourself, Emma. You're one of the strongest people I know. You've come so far, and yeah, it's hard. But don't forget you've got people who care about you. People who see your strength, even when you don't. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not Jessica. Emma swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everything she had been carrying for so long. She hadn't realized just how much she had been trying to prove until now. Prove that she was tough enough, that she could handle it, that she didn't need anyone to help her. But the truth was, she wasn't alone. And it was okay to need support. I guess I've been trying to prove something to myself, Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to show everyone, especially myself, that I'm not the girl who gets pushed around. But now, I'm not sure what comes next. I don't want to be that person anymore. Jake smiled gently, squeezing her hand. You're not that person anymore, Emma. You've already shown everyone what you're made of. And you don't have to keep proving it. You don't have to be perfect. You're allowed to be human. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. Jake's words were exactly what she needed to hear. She didn't have to keep fighting every single battle on her own. And she didn't have to be perfect. She could be strong, but also vulnerable. She could have her moments of doubt without letting them define her. With a deep breath, Emma smiled at Jake, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. Thank you. For everything. Jake grinned back, his blue eyes sparkling. Of course. I'm always here for you, Emma. And don't forget, you're not just some new girl anymore. You're Emma, the one who stood up to Jessica. The one who never backed down. That's who you are. As Emma walked home that evening, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The journey wasn't over, and she knew there would still be tough days ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a sense of peace within herself. She didn't need to fight every battle. She didn't need to prove anything. All she had to do was keep being herself. The girl who was stronger than she had ever believed. The following Monday brought with it a sense of calm that Emma hadn't felt in weeks. The weekend had given her some much-needed space to reflect on everything that had happened and regain her balance. She wasn't fully healed, far from it, but she was starting to understand something important. She had come a long way from the timid girl who had walked into that school only a few months ago. She had faced her fears, stood up to Jessica, and learned that it was okay to ask for help. As Emma made her way through the halls, she noticed that things felt different. The usual stares were still there, but they weren't as sharp, not as cutting. It was as though something had shifted in the air. Jessica and her clique were still present, but there was no longer the same sense of power or dominance in their posture. Emma couldn't help but wonder if they had begun to see her in a different light. It wasn't that she had suddenly become invincible, or that the bullying had completely stopped, it hadn't. But there was a newfound sense of quiet strength in Emma, one that made the whispers a little less effective, the glares a little less potent. As she walked into her first class of the day, she spotted Sarah already seated at their usual table. Emma smiled as she slid into the chair across from her. "Hey," Emma greeted, setting her books down. "Hey, you're looking better," Sarah observed, her voice warm. "How are you feeling? Still hanging in there?" Emma nodded, grateful for her friend's concern. "Yeah, actually. I think I'm finally starting to figure things out." "Good," Sarah said with a grin. "Because you deserve a break from all this. You're stronger than I think anyone realized." The bell rang, signaling the start of class, and they both turned their attention to the teacher as she entered the room. But as Emma sat there, listening to the lesson unfold, her mind drifted back to the last few months. She had never expected things to turn out like this, never imagined that she would become the center of so much drama and conflict. But now, in this moment of quiet, Emma realized that the journey she had been on had shaped her in ways she couldn't even put into words. And though she still had a long road ahead, she had come to understand that she wasn't fighting just to survive anymore. She was fighting to thrive. At lunch, Emma met up with Jake. He waved her over, and as she sat down, he smiled at her. "How's it going? Everything good?" "Yeah," Emma said, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Better than good. I think I've made peace with it. I'm not going to let Jessica get to me anymore. I've got bigger things to focus on." Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "That's the spirit." Emma's confidence had started to radiate in a way that was almost impossible to ignore. She had shed the layers of fear and doubt, and the girl who was left was someone who knew her worth, someone who knew how to stand up for herself. It felt empowering, even if it didn't always come easily. They spent the rest of lunch talking about everything and nothing, about school, their plans for the weekend, and even some of the silly things that had happened over the past few days. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was having a normal conversation. It wasn't overshadowed by drama or tension. It was just normal. And that was something she could appreciate. The next few days passed with more of the same, a few awkward moments with Jessica, some half-hearted jabs from Megan, and the occasional whisper behind her back. But Emma had learned something important during those weeks of struggle. She had learned that the opinions of others didn't define her. They could try to tear her down, but they couldn't touch the strength she had found within herself. Then, one afternoon, as Emma was walking out of her last class, she saw Jessica standing by the locker, talking to some of her friends. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she took a deep breath and walked past them, her head held high. Jessica's eyes followed her for a moment, and Emma couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. She didn't need to react to Jessica anymore. She didn't need to feel afraid. She had won the battle for herself, regardless of what happened next. As she stepped outside, the cool breeze swept through the air, and Emma smiled. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with warm shades of orange and pink. It felt like the world was changing, just like she was. When she met up with Jake again that afternoon, she could feel the difference in herself. She was more open, more willing to embrace the future, whatever it held. "Feeling good?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "Yeah, actually," Emma said, grinning back at him. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." Jake's smile widened. "You're unstoppable, Emma. I've always believed that." And for the first time, Emma truly believed it, too. The following days felt like a mix of relief and tension, with Emma trying her best to move forward despite the recent setback. After Jessica's words in the cafeteria, she had expected things to feel more difficult. She had expected the weight of it all to drag her down, like it had so many times before. But something inside Emma had shifted. Maybe it was the support of her friends or the realization that she had already fought so hard and couldn't let one person, no matter how cruel, take that away from her. Even though Jessica had humiliated her, Emma hadn't allowed herself to crumble. She had stood tall. And that made all the difference. The next morning, Emma woke up with a renewed sense of determination. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the girl who was just trying to survive. She saw someone who had fought back, who had overcome a lot, and who wasn't about to let a few words ruin the progress she had made. As she walked through the halls of the school that morning, there was a sense of quiet confidence in her step. The whispers were still there, the stares still sharp, but they no longer made her feel small. Emma knew she was no longer the girl who would shrink under pressure. She had learned to stand her ground. But even as she pushed through the tension, she still couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica wouldn't just let it go. She hadn't. Not yet. The rest of the week went by with little incident. Emma kept her head down during classes, focusing on her work and avoiding the cafeteria drama where Jessica often played her mind games. She spent time with Sarah, who had been nothing but supportive, and Jake, who had helped her keep perspective. They talked about everything, from the latest movie releases to their summer plans. For once, Emma felt like she could talk about something other than the constant battles at school. Yet, she knew the storm was still brewing. One afternoon, Emma was sitting in the library, reading a book for class, when she heard a familiar voice. She looked up and saw Jessica walking toward her, flanked by Megan and Amanda. Emma's heart rate quickened, and for a moment, she felt that old rush of anxiety. But then, she remembered the resolve she had found within herself over the past few weeks. Jessica smirked as she approached. "Well, well. The quiet new girl. I thought I'd find you here." Emma didn't react immediately, keeping her gaze steady. She had been through too much to let Jessica see how much her presence still affected her. "I'm just here to study," Emma said coolly, turning her attention back to her book. Jessica's voice took on a mocking tone. "Study? You really think you belong here, don't you? You're not like us, Emma. You're nothing but an outsider trying to fit in." Emma slowly closed her book, setting it aside. She wasn't going to let Jessica's words affect her anymore. She had worked too hard for this moment, for the peace she had found in herself, to let it slip away now. "You're right," Emma said, her voice firm. "I'm not like you. And I'm not trying to fit in with anyone who thinks they can push people around. But I do belong here. Just like anyone else." Jessica's smirk faltered for a second, clearly surprised by Emma's calmness. But she quickly regained her composure. "You think you can take me on? I'm not someone you want to mess with." Emma's eyes met Jessica's, not with fear, but with quiet confidence. "I'm not trying to mess with anyone. I'm just standing up for myself. Something you clearly don't know how to do." There was a brief moment of silence between them, as Jessica processed Emma's words. Emma felt the tension in the air, but she stood her ground. The truth was, she was done being afraid. She was done with the cycles of hurt and insecurity that had once ruled her life. "Whatever," Jessica finally snapped, clearly taken aback by Emma's newfound strength. "Don't think this is over." Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. Jessica's words no longer had the power to drag her down. She knew that Jessica was the one who was insecure, who had to tear others down to feel good about herself. Emma had learned that lesson all too well. As Jessica and her friends walked away, Emma took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had stood up for herself again, but this time, it felt different. It felt like the final step toward truly leaving behind the old fears and doubts that had plagued her. The battle wasn't over, but Emma was ready to face whatever came next, with her head held high. Later that day, as Emma walked out of school, she ran into Jake again. He noticed the look on her face immediately. "Hey, what happened?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "You look different." Emma smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I just realized something, Jake. I don't need to keep proving myself to anyone. I don't need to fight for a place here. I already belong." Jake's face softened, and he nodded. "You've always belonged, Emma. And you've come so far." They walked together in silence for a moment, the sounds of the bustling school fading away as Emma felt the weight of the past few months settle into something more peaceful. She hadn't been broken. She wasn't going to be. She had faced down the toughest challenge of all, learning to believe in herself, and she had won. Emma had learned a lot over the past few weeks. She had learned that standing up for herself wasn't about loud declarations or grand gestures. It was about quiet strength, about knowing when to speak up and when to let things go. And, most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. But just when she thought she had mastered the art of resilience, life threw another challenge her way. It was a chilly Tuesday afternoon when it happened. Emma was at her locker, gathering her things for the end of the school day. She had just finished her last class, and all she wanted was to head home, maybe relax, and catch up on some reading. But as she closed her locker, she turned around to see Jessica standing just a few feet away, blocking her path. "Can I help you?" Emma asked, her voice calm but guarded. She had been through enough with Jessica to know this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. Jessica didn't answer right away. She just stared at Emma with that same, cold look she always wore. The girl had a way of making everything feel tense, like she was always about to pounce. "I need to talk to you," Jessica said after a beat, her tone sharper than usual. Emma felt a flicker of unease, but she didn't let it show. "About what?" Jessica crossed her arms, eyeing Emma with a kind of superiority. "You've been acting like you've got it all figured out. Like you can just walk around here like nothing happened. But you don't know what it's like to be someone like me." Emma raised an eyebrow. She wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, but she had a feeling Jessica wasn't about to offer her a peace treaty. "What are you getting at?" Jessica leaned in, her voice lower but still full of venom. "You think you're the only one who's been hurt? That you're the only one who's been through something? You think you've got it tough? I've been through more than you'll ever know." Emma took a step back, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what Jessica's angle was, but she knew she couldn't let herself get caught in another trap. "I'm not here to compare pain with you, Jessica. I'm just trying to live my life and move forward." "Well, maybe you should think about who you're leaving behind," Jessica snapped, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not going to let you just walk away from this." Before Emma could respond, Jessica turned and stormed off, leaving Emma standing there, feeling the weight of her words. Emma stood there for a moment, digesting the encounter. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Had she just been threatened again? Or was Jessica trying to make her feel guilty about something? Either way, Emma knew that she couldn't let Jessica's words get under her skin. She had come too far for that. That evening, Emma called Sarah. She needed to talk it out. Sarah was her rock through everything, and even though Emma had grown a lot on her own, she still valued having someone to lean on. "Hey, what's up?" Sarah answered on the second ring. "Hey, I had another run-in with Jessica today," Emma said, her voice a little strained. "I'm not sure what it was about, but it left me feeling off." There was a pause on the other end before Sarah spoke. "What happened?" Emma recounted the conversation, trying to make sense of it as she spoke. When she finished, she could almost hear Sarah thinking. "Okay, well, first of all, she's clearly trying to get under your skin," Sarah said, her voice firm. "But don't let her. She's got her own issues, and she's projecting them onto you. Don't take responsibility for her mess." Emma felt a little better just hearing Sarah's words. "Yeah, but it's like she wants me to feel sorry for her. I don't even know if that's what she's really after, but it's confusing." "I get it," Sarah said. "But you don't owe her anything. You've been through your own stuff, and you don't have to take on hers, too." Emma smiled at her friend's reassuring words. "Thanks, Sarah. I think I just needed to hear that. I don't want to keep second-guessing myself every time she looks at me the wrong way." "I'm glad I could help," Sarah said. "Just keep doing what you're doing. You're stronger than you think." The call ended, and Emma felt a little lighter. Sarah was right. She couldn't keep letting Jessica's behavior affect her. She couldn't keep wondering what Jessica was thinking or trying to figure out what game she was playing. Emma had learned the hard way that she couldn't control anyone else's actions, she could only control her own. The next day at school, Jessica didn't approach her again, but Emma still felt that nagging unease in the back of her mind. The encounter had shaken her more than she cared to admit. But she was determined to keep moving forward. She wasn't going to let Jessica, of all people, determine how she felt. She had faced her own battles and come out stronger, and she would do it again. As the school day ended and Emma gathered her things, she ran into Jake on the way out. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked, his smile warm and genuine. "Good," Emma replied, trying to push the lingering tension out of her mind. "Better than good, actually. Jake raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Emma shrugged. I'm just realizing that I don't need to get caught up in anyone's drama. Especially not Jessica's. I've got my own stuff to focus on. Jake grinned. That's the spirit. And for the first time in a while, Emma truly felt like she was moving forward. It wasn't always going to be easy, and there would be days when Jessica would still try to drag her down, but Emma was done letting those moments define her. She had learned the most important lesson of all: true strength came from within. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emma walked through the school hallway with her head held high, feeling a sense of empowerment that had been absent only a few months ago. It had taken a lot to get to this point, months of self-discovery, standing up for herself, and learning the value of true friendships. Still, she couldn't deny that Jessica's words continued to linger in the back of her mind, like a low hum that wouldn't quite fade away. As she entered the cafeteria, Emma spotted Sarah sitting at their usual table. Sarah waved her over, a warm smile on her face, and Emma felt the tension in her chest ease a little. "Hey," Sarah greeted her. "How's it going today?" "Better, I think," Emma replied, sliding into the seat across from her friend. "I've been trying not to let Jessica get to me, but I'm still feeling a little off." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Off? What do you mean?" Emma hesitated for a moment before speaking, choosing her words carefully. "It's like, I know I'm doing the right thing by ignoring her, but I can't shake the feeling that something's still brewing. I just don't want to be caught off guard again." "I get that," Sarah said, nodding in understanding. "But you've come so far, Emma. You're handling things way better than you ever have. You're not the same person who let her get under your skin before. So even if she does try something, you've got this." Emma smiled, grateful for Sarah's unwavering support. "Thanks, Sarah. I just have to remind myself of that. It's easy to second-guess yourself when someone is constantly trying to knock you down." Sarah looked around the cafeteria for a moment before leaning in a little closer. "You know, speaking of people trying to knock you down, I heard a rumor today that Jessica's been spreading about you." Emma frowned. "What kind of rumor?" "I don't know the specifics, but I overheard some girls talking. They said Jessica's been telling people that you're trying to steal her friends, like you're some kind of threat to her group," Sarah explained. Emma chuckled bitterly, though it lacked humor. "Typical. She can't just leave me alone, can she?" "She's clearly threatened by you, Emma," Sarah said. "And honestly, I think that's a good thing. You've shown her you're not going to crumble under her pressure, and that makes her nervous." Emma nodded, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. She had never thought of it that way before. Maybe Jessica wasn't just trying to hurt her. Maybe she was trying to control the situation because she was scared. "Well, that's her problem, not mine," Emma said, her voice firm. "I'm not going to let her manipulate me like that." Sarah grinned. "Exactly. You've got this, Emma. Don't let her drag you into her mess." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Emma couldn't shake the idea that Jessica was more insecure than she had ever realized. As Sarah continued to chat about their upcoming weekend plans, Emma's thoughts kept circling back to the notion that perhaps Jessica wasn't just a bully, maybe she was someone in need of help, even if she didn't know it. The rest of the day passed without incident. Emma felt like she was starting to regain her footing. She had a new perspective on things now. She no longer felt like the shy new girl trying to fit in, she was someone with her own strength, her own voice. And she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Jessica, take that away from her. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Emma grabbed her things and walked toward the exit, her steps more confident than they had been in months. But as she stepped outside, she froze. There, standing just a few feet away, was Jessica. This time, Jessica wasn't alone. Megan and Amanda were with her, and they were all looking at Emma like they were about to confront her. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but instead of retreating into herself like she might have before, she took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. Jessica smirked. "I've been hearing things about you, Emma. About how you think you're above everyone else. About how you think you don't need to play by the rules." Emma felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't let her fear show. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Jessica said, taking a step closer, her eyes cold and piercing. "You've been getting too comfortable here. Too comfortable around my friends. I don't think you understand your place yet." Emma stood taller. "You don't get to tell me where I belong, Jessica. I belong wherever I choose to be." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Standing up to me like you're so brave." "I'm not trying to be a hero," Emma said, her voice steady. "I'm just standing up for myself. And I'm done letting you make me feel small." For a moment, there was silence between them, the tension thick in the air. Jessica's face flushed with anger, but Emma didn't flinch. She had already made it clear that she wasn't going to back down anymore. Finally, Jessica spoke again, her voice low but venomous. "You think you've won? This isn't over, Emma. Not by a long shot." Emma didn't respond. She simply turned on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. She had taken a stand. She had spoken her truth. And nothing, no one, could take that away from her. As Emma walked home that day, the weight of the encounter still on her shoulders, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had faced her fears and had not let them control her. Jessica might keep trying to drag her into her drama, but Emma was done being her target. She was done letting anyone control her narrative. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about everything she had been through. It hadn't been easy, but she had grown stronger because of it. She had learned to stand tall in the face of adversity, to hold on to her truth even when others tried to tear it down. And most importantly, she had learned that her worth didn't come from the approval of others. It came from within. She smiled to herself, the last thought on her mind as she drifted off to sleep, "I am enough." And with that, she finally felt at peace. The next few weeks at school passed with an unexpected calm. Emma had been waiting for Jessica to escalate things again, but to her surprise, Jessica seemed to back off. For the first time, Emma felt like she could breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. Her interactions with her classmates were generally pleasant, and the whispers that had once followed her around seemed to dissipate. However, Emma knew better than to think the storm was truly over. She had learned from her experiences that things could change in an instant, and she was cautious, not allowing herself to get too comfortable. There was still that lingering feeling that Jessica was lying in wait, ready to strike again. One morning, as Emma walked through the school parking lot toward the entrance, she noticed a small group of students gathered near the benches by the entrance. They weren't the usual crowd of friends laughing and chatting. This group seemed more tense, and there was an underlying sense of urgency in the way they moved. Emma caught a glimpse of Jessica's blonde hair among them, but there was something different about her today. She was surrounded by her usual crew, Megan and Amanda, but they weren't just hanging out. They looked worried. Emma paused at the entrance of the school, her curiosity piqued. She was already on edge, wondering if this was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when Jessica would make her move again. As she turned the corner and started walking toward her locker, she overheard a conversation between a couple of students nearby. They were whispering in low tones, but Emma's ears caught the key words. "Did you hear what happened last night?" one of them asked. "I can't believe it," the other replied. "I don't think anyone expected it, especially not from Jessica. She's always been the one in control." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. What did they mean? What had happened? Jessica had always been the one to manipulate and control, but the way the students were talking made it seem like something had shifted. Something had changed. She glanced over at Sarah, who was coming down the hall toward her, looking her usual cheerful self. Emma waved her over, her mind racing. "Hey, Sarah, did you hear anything about Jessica? There's something going on, and I have a feeling it's not good." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Like, more drama. I overheard some students talking. They said something happened last night with Jessica," Emma explained. "It's like, she's not the one calling the shots anymore." Sarah stopped in her tracks. "Wait, what? You think something happened to her? Like she's in trouble?" "I don't know," Emma said, feeling unsettled. "But I can't shake the feeling that whatever it is, it's big." Before Sarah could respond, Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, checking the message. It was from Jake. "Jake, hey, are you okay? I heard some things about Jessica, is everything alright?" Emma quickly typed back, "I don't know yet. I've got a bad feeling. I'll keep you posted." She slipped her phone back into her pocket and glanced around the hallway, her instincts telling her that something was about to unfold. The atmosphere felt different today, heavy with unspoken tension. Emma couldn't put her finger on it, but she had a sinking feeling that this was the calm before the storm. The rest of the school day passed without incident, but Emma's mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Jessica, to the whispers and the strange energy that seemed to follow her around. She couldn't shake the thought that whatever had happened to Jessica was going to come back around and impact her in some way. After school, Emma sat down at the cafe where she and Sarah often met to study. It was a quiet place, perfect for decompressing after a long day. But even here, Emma couldn't escape the nagging sense of impending change. "Sarah, I don't know if I'm just being paranoid, but something feels off," Emma said, stirring her iced coffee absently. "I can't shake the feeling that Jessica is about to do something crazy again." Sarah took a sip of her own drink, watching Emma carefully. "It's possible. I mean, she's been pretty quiet lately, right? Maybe she's plotting something behind the scenes." Emma frowned. "I'm not sure, but I don't like the feeling I'm getting. It's like the whole school is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen." Sarah nodded, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Have you heard what happened to her last night?" Emma's eyes widened. "No. What happened?" "I overheard some girls talking this morning. Apparently, Jessica got into a huge argument with her mom, like, a blow-up fight," Sarah explained. "It was bad, some of the other students say it got physical." Emma's stomach flipped. "What? With her mom?" "Yeah," Sarah replied. "And I don't know all the details, but it seems like Jessica's life at home is falling apart. Like she's lost control of everything." Emma sat back in her chair, processing the new information. She had always known that Jessica's behavior came from somewhere, maybe it was the pressure she felt at home, or maybe it was something deeper, but this revelation added a layer of complexity to everything. If Jessica was unraveling at home, it might explain why she had been acting out even more lately. Maybe her bullying had been a way to gain control in a life that was spiraling out of control. "Do you think this could change everything?" Emma asked, more to herself than Sarah. Sarah shrugged. "Maybe. But Emma, I don't want you to feel like you have to save her. You don't owe her anything, and if she's spiraling, that's not your problem to fix." Emma nodded. She didn't want to get caught up in Jessica's drama, but she couldn't ignore the fact that someone was clearly in pain. Still, she knew she couldn't let herself be dragged back into the same toxic patterns. She had worked too hard to find her strength and peace to let anyone take that away from her. The rest of their conversation drifted into lighter topics, but Emma's mind remained focused on what she had just learned. She couldn't ignore the reality of Jessica's situation, but she also couldn't allow it to define her or pull her into the mess she had worked so hard to escape. The storm might be coming. But Emma was no longer the scared girl she had been when she first arrived at this school. She was stronger now, more confident, more in control. And whatever came next, she would face it head-on. The next day, Emma couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was about to happen. She walked through the hallways of the school with an unfamiliar unease, her thoughts constantly on Jessica and what Sarah had told her the day before. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. Jessica's recent behavior, the tension with her friends, and now this new information about her home life, it was all pointing toward one thing: Jessica wasn't the bully she once appeared to be, at least not entirely. She was a girl in pain, lashing out in the only way she knew how. Emma couldn't help but feel a flicker of empathy for Jessica, even though she had been the target of her cruelty for so long. She knew what it felt like to struggle with things others didn't understand. Maybe it was time to see Jessica not as an enemy, but as someone who needed help. Still, Emma wasn't naive. She knew better than to jump into the mess that was Jessica's life without thinking it through. By the time lunch rolled around, Emma had made a decision. She found Sarah sitting in their usual spot at the cafeteria, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. Emma hesitated for a moment before sitting down, trying to find the right words. "Sarah, I think I need to talk to Jessica," Emma said, her voice low but determined. Sarah looked up in surprise. "Talk to Jessica? After everything that's happened?" "I know it sounds crazy, but I can't stop thinking about what I heard yesterday," Emma replied. "If Jessica's really going through something that bad at home, I just think maybe it's time I try to talk to her. Not to fix her, but to at least show her some kind of understanding." Sarah's expression softened, and she leaned back in her chair, thinking it over. "I get what you're saying, Emma. But are you sure you're ready for that? I mean, she's still the same person who made your life miserable. I just don't want you to get hurt." Emma nodded. "I get it. I'm not going to be stupid about it. But I can't just sit here and do nothing when I know she's going through something." Sarah sighed but gave Emma a small smile. "Well, if anyone can handle it, it's you. But just promise me you won't let her manipulate you again, okay?" "I promise," Emma said, though she wasn't entirely sure she could keep that promise. But one thing she was sure of was that she didn't want to be a passive bystander in someone else's story. She wanted to make a difference. Later that afternoon, Emma walked through the school hallways, her mind focused on what she had to do. She found Jessica standing by her locker, as usual, with Megan and Amanda by her side. Jessica's expression was unreadable, but Emma could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Her posture was tense, as if she were bracing herself for something, but when Emma approached, she didn't turn away. It was almost as though she was waiting. "Jessica," Emma said softly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Can we talk?" For a moment, Jessica didn't respond. Her eyes flicked toward Megan and Amanda, who gave her a look of confusion, but she silently nodded for them to walk away. The two girls exchanged a glance before reluctantly heading down the hall. "What do you want, Emma?" Jessica asked, her tone colder than usual, but there was something more vulnerable underneath it. I just want to talk," Emma repeated, trying to keep her voice calm. "I know things haven't been easy between us, but I don't want to keep fighting. I think there's more going on than I realized." Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "What are you talking about?" Emma took a deep breath, her words slow and measured. "I overheard some things, about what's going on with you. About your family. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry if I've ever made things worse. I know I can't fix everything, but I'm not here to fight. I just want to understand." For a moment, Jessica said nothing, her eyes studying Emma as if searching for any sign of deceit. But when she spoke, her voice was softer than Emma had ever heard it before. "Why would you care?" Jessica asked, almost bitterly. "You've got your life. Your friends. Why would you want to get involved in mine?" Emma took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "Because I know what it's like to feel like everything's falling apart. To feel like you have to fight just to keep your head above water. I've been there. And maybe I can help, even if it's just by listening." Jessica's eyes flickered with something Emma couldn't quite place, a mix of surprise, confusion, and maybe even gratitude. For a moment, Emma thought she might say something, but then she turned away, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I don't need your help," Jessica muttered, though there was no real conviction in her voice. "I can handle things myself." Emma nodded, not pushing any further. "I get that. But if you ever change your mind, I'm here." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jessica standing at her locker. Emma's heart raced, unsure of what to expect next. Had she made a mistake? Was Jessica just going to push her away again? But as Emma made her way down the hallway, she felt something shift. There was a sense of relief in her chest, a quiet satisfaction that she had done something she'd never thought possible. She had stepped into the unknown, trying to understand someone who had been a source of pain in her life. And while the future was still uncertain, Emma knew that she had taken a step towards something better. Later that evening, Emma sat in her room, staring out the window at the darkening sky. The day had felt like a breakthrough, small, but significant. She had faced Jessica head-on, not with anger or hatred, but with empathy. And though Jessica hadn't opened up to her, Emma felt hopeful. She didn't know if their conversation had changed anything, but she felt like she had done the right thing. Maybe, just maybe, Jessica wasn't the villain of the story after all. Maybe she was just another person, trying to survive in a world that had dealt her a rough hand. Emma leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she had done something important today. She had offered a chance at connection, at understanding. And that, in itself, was enough. The next few days felt like a strange kind of limbo. Emma wasn't sure if her attempt to reach out to Jessica had made any difference, but something about the atmosphere in school had shifted. The usual tension between them had lessened, though it was replaced with an awkward silence that hung in the air whenever they crossed paths. It wasn't exactly a peace, but it was closer to one than Emma had ever imagined. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica was still keeping her distance, but Emma didn't press her. She had done what she could, and now it was up to Jessica to decide whether or not she wanted to talk. What surprised Emma the most was the lack of retaliation. No cruel remarks, no whispers behind her back, nothing. The silence was almost eerie. One afternoon, after school, Emma was sitting on a bench in the courtyard, her phone in hand as she scrolled through messages from Jake. Their conversations had become a comforting routine, a welcome distraction from the chaos of school life. She had learned to lean on him, something she hadn't done much before. His support was steady, like a lighthouse in the storm, and Emma appreciated that more than she could express. "Hey, you okay?" Jake's text popped up, breaking her out of her thoughts. "Emma, I'm fine, just a little confused." "Jake, about what?" "Emma, Jessica. I don't know if I did the right thing by talking to her. She hasn't done anything crazy, but it's like she's just standing there, waiting." "Jake, I get it. But you took a step. That's more than most people would have done. She might not be ready to open up, but you planted a seed. That's all you can do." Emma smiled at the reassurance in his words. She knew he was right, but it didn't stop the questions from swirling in her mind. She had reached out, and now she was left to wonder if it had made any real difference in Jessica's world. The sound of footsteps interrupted her train of thought, and she looked up to see Jessica walking toward her. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something different about her today, something that made Emma's heart skip a beat. Was this it? Was Jessica finally going to respond to their last conversation? "Hey," Jessica said quietly, standing a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. There was no animosity in her voice, no edge. She simply seemed hesitant. Emma stood up slowly, meeting her gaze. "Hey. What's up?" Jessica seemed to hesitate for a moment, glancing around as if unsure of what to say. I've been thinking about what you said the other day." Emma's heart fluttered. You have? Jessica nodded, her eyes avoiding Emma's for a moment before meeting her gaze. Yeah. I don't know why, but I guess I kind of want to apologize. For everything. Emma blinked, taken aback by the words. An apology from Jessica? It was more than she had ever expected, especially after everything that had happened between them. You don't have to apologize, Emma said quickly, though she was still processing the weight of what Jessica had just said. I know things were hard, but I just wanted to talk. I didn't want to make things worse. Jessica gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I know. And I don't know if I'm ready to explain everything to you, but I get why you would want to. It's just, not that simple. Emma's curiosity was piqued, but she resisted the urge to push for answers. I understand. I just want you to know that if you ever want to talk, I'm here. For a moment, Jessica stood still, her gaze fixed on Emma. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, she sighed, as if releasing a breath she had been holding for far too long. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again, especially after everything that's happened. But I do appreciate you trying, Jessica said quietly. Maybe that's a start. Emma felt a surge of emotion at Jessica's words. It wasn't an apology she had expected, but it was more than she had hoped for. She nodded slowly, trying to keep her voice steady. That's more than enough for me, Emma replied. We don't have to be friends, but we don't have to be enemies either. Jessica's eyes softened for a moment, and there was a brief flicker of something, maybe relief, maybe gratitude, in her expression. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of students leaving for the day. Emma stood there, her heart racing, feeling a mix of emotions that she couldn't quite process. She had expected some kind of confrontation, maybe even another round of cruelty. But this was different. Jessica hadn't forgiven her, but she had acknowledged her efforts, and for the first time, Emma felt like she had truly reached her. That night, as Emma lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a full resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. It was the first time in months that Emma didn't feel like a target, the first time she felt like she had genuinely made a difference, even if it was just a small one. But as Emma closed her eyes, a part of her couldn't help but wonder what Jessica's apology really meant. Was it sincere, or was it just a way to keep her at arm's length, to avoid any further confrontation? She didn't know. But what she did know was this: she had reached out, and Jessica had responded. And that, in itself, was progress. The next day, Emma found herself walking through the school halls with a newfound sense of purpose. She wasn't waiting for things to go back to normal. She wasn't hoping for a fairy tale resolution. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was in control of her own story. Whatever came next, she knew she could handle it. She had already faced the worst, and now, she was stronger for it. The days after the conversation with Jessica were quiet, almost too quiet. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, though she had no idea what it would be. The shift between her and Jessica, however small, had created a strange tension. It wasn't a sudden friendship, but it was a marked difference from the animosity that had once ruled their interactions. It was Friday afternoon, the last bell of the school day ringing through the hallways as students streamed out of classrooms, eager for the weekend. Emma was walking to her locker, her mind still preoccupied with her conversation with Jessica, when she spotted Sarah waiting for her by the exit. Her best friend waved enthusiastically, her smile wide as always. "Hey!" Sarah called, her voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. "How's it going?" Emma returned her smile, relieved to see her familiar face. "I'm good. Just, still processing everything." Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Processing what? Did something happen with Jessica?" Emma nodded slowly as she opened her locker, grabbing her things. "Yeah, we talked the other day. She apologized. Sarah's eyes widened. Wait, what? Jessica apologized. The Jessica who's been tormenting you since we started high school. Are you sure? Emma chuckled at Sarah's reaction, but there was a warmth in her voice. I know. It was unexpected. She didn't exactly spill her guts, but it was a step. She said she wasn't ready to trust anyone, but that she appreciated me trying. Wow, that's huge, Sarah said, her voice softer now. I mean, I didn't think she'd ever even acknowledge it, let alone apologize. Yeah, me neither, Emma admitted, her fingers absently twirling the lock on her bag. It wasn't some big revelation, but it was something. I think she's not as closed off as I thought she was. It's a start. Sarah seemed lost in thought for a moment, then nodded. You know, Emma, I'm proud of you. I don't think anyone else would have tried to be that understanding. Most people would have just written her off. Emma smiled at Sarah's words. Well, it's not like I'm going to turn into her best friend tomorrow. I'm just trying to do what feels right. You definitely have a way with people, Sarah said, nudging her playfully. But hey, don't forget about us while you're playing counselor to the mean girl. I won't, Emma laughed. You're stuck with me. As they walked toward the exit together, Sarah leaned in closer, her tone lowering slightly. Just be careful, okay? I get that you want to help, but you don't know what's going on with her behind the scenes. She might not be ready for whatever it is you're offering, and I don't want you to get hurt. Emma nodded, understanding Sarah's concern. I get it. But if I wait for her to be ready, she might never be. I'm just going to keep being me. If she wants to talk, I'll be here. Sarah smiled and gave her a thumbs up. I like that. Keep being you, Emma. You're doing great. That night, Emma sat in her room, reviewing her thoughts. The week had been filled with moments of uncertainty, but also quiet victories. Talking to Jessica had been one of the hardest things she'd ever done, but it had also been the most rewarding. The conversation hadn't solved all the problems, but it had opened the door. And now, Emma was left to wait and see if Jessica would ever walk through it. Later, as she scrolled through her phone, Emma saw a message from Jake. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. Jake, how's everything with Jessica? Emma, honestly, I don't know yet. We talked, but I'm not sure what it all means. She said she wasn't ready to trust anyone, but she apologized for what happened between us. I think that's progress. Jake, I'm proud of you, Emma. You've come so far. Emma's heart swelled with warmth at his words. She didn't often hear Jake praise her like that, but when he did, it meant more than she could express. She typed her response quickly. Emma, thanks, Jake. It feels like I'm walking a fine line, but I'm hopeful. I just hope this doesn't backfire. Jake, it won't. You're doing the right thing. Just keep your boundaries and trust yourself. Emma smiled to herself as she read the message again. He was right. She had to trust herself, no matter how messy things got. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. The next day, Emma arrived at school with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She didn't know what would happen next, but the possibilities seemed endless. It was almost like she had crossed some invisible line, and now there was no going back. As she made her way to her locker, she spotted Jessica standing nearby, talking with Megan and Amanda. For a moment, Emma considered turning around and walking the other way, but then she remembered their conversation. She wasn't going to run from this. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward them, her steps deliberate. She had made a decision. She wasn't going to be afraid anymore. Hey, Jessica, Emma said as she approached, her voice calm but firm. Jessica turned to face her, and Emma saw something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, but also something more. She didn't back away, though. She simply stood there, waiting. I just wanted to check in, Emma said, glancing at Megan and Amanda. They were standing back, clearly watching the exchange with curiosity. I know things have been weird, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. If you ever need to talk, I'm still here. Jessica looked at Emma for a long moment before nodding slightly. I appreciate that, Emma. I'll let you know if I need anything. Emma smiled, feeling a strange sense of relief. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was enough for now. Enough to know that things weren't going to stay the way they were. As she walked away, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. She had done what she could, and now it was in Jessica's hands. Whatever happened next, Emma had made the choice to try and make a difference. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was on the right path. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she wasn't afraid of the journey anymore. No matter what obstacles came her way, she knew she had the strength to face them. The following week felt like a strange mixture of normalcy and uncertainty. Emma went through the motions of her day-to-day life, but something had shifted. It wasn't just the tension with Jessica, it was the way Emma saw herself in relation to everything around her. She no longer felt like an outsider, like the victim. There was a sense of quiet power in her decision to reach out, but there was also an undercurrent of nervousness. She wasn't sure if Jessica would actually come around, but Emma had learned to stop worrying about outcomes and focus more on her actions. If nothing else, she could be proud of the way she had handled herself. But, as the days passed, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was missing something that would either make this situation better or worse. One afternoon, Emma was sitting in the library, her nose buried in a book, when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Jessica standing there, looking oddly out of place in the quiet study area. Her expression was unreadable, but Emma could see a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "Hey," Jessica said, her voice low. "Can we talk?" Emma was momentarily taken aback. Was this it? Was Jessica finally going to open up? A part of Emma felt a rush of excitement, but she quickly pushed it down, reminding herself to stay grounded. "Yeah, sure," Emma replied, closing her book and setting it aside. She followed Jessica as she led the way to a quieter corner of the library, away from prying eyes. They sat down across from each other, the awkward silence between them palpable. Emma waited, giving Jessica the space to speak, but it seemed like Jessica wasn't sure how to begin. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," Jessica started, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "About you, about me, about how I've treated people, especially you." Emma nodded but said nothing. She wasn't going to push Jessica. If this conversation was going to happen, it had to happen on Jessica's terms. Jessica sighed and leaned back in her chair, clearly searching for the right words. "I didn't want to be the person who hurt people. I didn't mean to become this thing that everyone was afraid of. But it happened. And I let it happen." Emma's heart ached at the vulnerability in Jessica's words. It wasn't the apology she had imagined, but it was raw and honest. Jessica wasn't offering a neat resolution, but she was acknowledging her part in the tension that had built up between them over the years. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes," Jessica continued, her eyes meeting Emma's for the first time since they sat down. "And I don't expect you to forgive me or even trust me right away. I'm just trying to figure things out. But I want you to know that I regret it all. I didn't know how to be anything else." Emma absorbed her words, her mind racing. She had expected this conversation to be difficult, but hearing Jessica's remorse, the rawness of it, left Emma with a feeling of conflicted relief. It was hard to reconcile the girl who had tormented her for years with the one sitting in front of her now, vulnerable and questioning her own behavior. "I'm not asking you to fix me," Jessica said quietly, almost as if reading Emma's thoughts. "I'm not asking for you to suddenly be my friend. I just wanted you to know that I see it. I see what I did, and I'm sorry." Emma took a deep breath. Her instincts told her to stay cautious, but there was something about Jessica's sincerity that made her pause. This wasn't an easy conversation for either of them. It was messy and imperfect, but it was real. "I'm not sure what to say," Emma admitted, feeling the weight of the conversation settle between them. "I don't know what comes next, but I appreciate you saying that. I don't know if I can just forget everything, but I do believe you." Jessica's face softened, and for the first time in their entire relationship, Emma saw something other than hardness in her eyes. It was a fragile piece, one that Emma wasn't sure would last, but it was something. "You don't have to forget." "I don't expect that," Jessica said with a small smile. "But I think we can be better than what we were. Don't you think?" Emma nodded slowly, still processing everything. "Yeah. I think we can be." With that, Jessica stood up and gave Emma a small, tentative smile before walking away, leaving Emma alone in the library. Her thoughts were a swirl of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to celebrate this breakthrough, but another part of her couldn't shake the fear of what it meant. Was this really the beginning of something different? Or was Jessica just saying what she thought Emma needed to hear? Despite her uncertainty, Emma felt a small weight lifting off her shoulders. This conversation didn't solve everything, it didn't even solve most things, but it was a step forward. It was an acknowledgement of the past, a tentative bridge between the two girls who had been enemies for so long. As she packed up her things and prepared to leave, Emma found herself thinking about all the things that had led her to this point. The bullying, the isolation, the struggle to find her place in a world that seemed to push her down at every turn. She had faced so much, and yet, she was still standing. She wasn't sure where things would go from here, or if Jessica would truly change. But Emma had learned something crucial about herself in this journey: she was strong. She had weathered the worst of the storm and had come out the other side stronger, more confident, and more sure of who she was. As she walked out of the library and into the bright sunlight of the afternoon, Emma knew that whatever happened next, she was ready. She wasn't defined by the past, by the people who tried to tear her down. She was defined by the way she chose to stand up, to keep fighting. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she needed. The days that followed Jessica's conversation with Emma were quieter than usual. It was almost as if the school had settled into a new rhythm, one that was unfamiliar but strangely peaceful. Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of the calm. It was a fleeting moment of stillness before something would inevitably change. She didn't know what would happen next, but the seed of hope had been planted, and that was something she couldn't ignore. The weekend passed without incident, and when Monday morning rolled around, Emma was ready to face the challenges of another week. She walked into school with a sense of determination, the weight of the conversation with Jessica still fresh in her mind. She didn't know where their relationship was going, but she wasn't going to shy away from what she had started. She had made a decision, and she was going to stick to it. As she made her way through the crowded hallways, Emma saw Jessica talking with Megan and Amanda by their usual locker. Emma paused for a moment, watching them. It wasn't lost on her that Jessica seemed different. She wasn't the same girl who had once reveled in tearing others down. There was a shift in the way she carried herself, a softness in her posture, as if she was finally taking off the armor she had worn for so long. Emma hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Should she approach her again? Should she let Jessica come to her? As much as she wanted to fix everything, Emma knew she couldn't force it. She had offered her hand, and now, it was up to Jessica to decide what to do with it. Taking a deep breath, Emma walked past the group, giving them a quick nod of acknowledgement. Jessica caught her eye, and for a split second, their gazes locked. There was a brief, almost imperceptible moment of understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement that something had changed, even if they didn't know what it was yet. Emma kept walking, heading for her first class. The bell rang just as she entered the classroom, signaling the start of a new day. As the morning passed, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She kept glancing at Jessica, who seemed to be in a quiet conversation with Megan and Amanda. There was no tension in the air, but there was an underlying feeling of anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that things were teetering on the edge, just waiting for a small push to tip the balance. The real test came during lunch. Emma had just picked up her food and found a seat when she saw Jessica walking toward her. She was with Megan and Amanda, but the trio wasn't laughing or joking as usual. Instead, Jessica seemed focused, almost serious. Emma's heart skipped a beat as they approached her table. "Hey, Emma," Jessica said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Emma looked up, surprised. "Hey, Jessica. What's up?" Jessica hesitated, glancing at Megan and Amanda before turning her attention back to Emma. "Can we sit with you for a minute?" Emma raised an eyebrow. This was unexpected. Jessica, Megan, and Amanda had always kept their distance from her, and now, here they were, standing in front of her table. "Sure," Emma said, motioning to the empty seats across from her. She felt a rush of nerves but kept her face neutral. "Take a seat." The three girls sat down, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence. Emma could hear the soft murmur of other students talking around them, the clatter of trays and forks, but in that moment, everything felt still. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. "I know this might seem weird," she began, her tone tentative. "But we've been talking, and we all realized that we were wrong. We treated you badly, and that was on us. We didn't even stop to think about how it must have felt for you." Emma felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't just Jessica, this was Megan and Amanda too, both of whom had been part of the group that had made her life miserable for so long. "You don't have to forgive us right away," Megan added, her voice quieter than usual. "But we want to make it right." "We're sorry, Emma." Amanda nodded, her expression sincere. "Yeah, we were just going with the flow before, not really thinking about how much we were hurting you." Emma's mind raced. She had prepared herself for a lot of things, confrontations, denials, maybe even more subtle jabs, but this? This was something completely unexpected. She hadn't anticipated an apology from all three of them, especially not in such a direct and honest way. It was almost too much to process in one sitting. For a moment, Emma said nothing. She needed to absorb this. The girls who had been her tormentors for so long were now sitting in front of her, offering apologies and acknowledging the pain they had caused. Part of her wanted to jump in and say everything was fine, that they were forgiven, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, took time. "Thank you," Emma finally said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I really appreciate you saying that. But, it's not going to be easy to just forget what happened. It's going to take time." Jessica nodded, her expression understanding. "We get that. We're not asking for instant forgiveness. We just want to start over, you know. We want to do better." Emma glanced at Megan and Amanda. They both looked genuine, and Emma could see the weight of regret in their eyes. This wasn't a game. This wasn't just about saving face or trying to make things look good. They were trying to change, trying to be better. And that was worth something. "I'm not sure what this means yet," Emma continued, her voice quieter now. "But I'm willing to see where it goes." Jessica smiled, a small but sincere smile that Emma hadn't seen on her face in a long time. "That's all we can ask for." The rest of lunch passed in an odd sense of peace. There was no more tension between them, no more stares or silent judgments. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. They sat together, eating their lunch, and talking about everything and nothing at all. It felt normal. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Jessica, Megan, and Amanda stood up, gathering their trays. "We'll see you later, Emma," Jessica said, her voice more confident now. Emma watched them walk away, her mind still processing everything that had just happened. Was this the beginning of something new? Could things really change, or was this just a brief moment of peace before everything returned to the way it had been? She didn't know yet. But for the first time, she felt a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The next few days were a mix of quiet reflection and cautious optimism for Emma. After the unexpected lunch with Jessica, Megan, and Amanda, things at school seemed to be shifting in a way she hadn't anticipated. The hallway chatter was no longer filled with whispers about her, and the stares from her former bullies had dwindled. It felt almost surreal, like she had stepped into a different version of her life where people were beginning to notice her for the right reasons. However, despite the seeming tranquility, Emma couldn't help but feel like she was walking on eggshells. She had always been an observer, keeping her distance from the drama of high school, but now it felt like the rules of the game had changed. She wasn't just the outsider anymore, she was navigating the uncharted waters of potential friendships with people who had, in the past, been her tormentors. It was Thursday when Emma's cautious hopefulness was put to the test. She had just finished her last class of the day and was heading to the library when she bumped into Jessica in the hallway. Jessica was with Megan and Amanda again, but this time, there was a noticeable lack of tension. The three girls seemed comfortable in each other's company, but Emma could feel the weight of her own uncertainty looming over the interaction. "Hey, Emma!" Jessica called, waving her over. Her voice was casual, light, nothing like the edge Emma had grown used to hearing in their past exchanges. Emma stopped in her tracks, her heart racing a little. She had been bracing herself for a normal day, not for an encounter with Jessica so soon after their conversation. But here it was. "Hey, Jessica," Emma said, forcing herself to sound calm. She gave a small wave, her mind running through all the possible outcomes of this interaction. Megan grinned at her, a grin that was far more genuine than the smug smirk she used to wear. "We were just heading to the cafeteria to grab a snack. You want to come with us?" The invitation was casual, but Emma could tell it was more than that. It was an olive branch, an attempt to pull her into their group. For a brief moment, Emma hesitated. Was this the right move? Could she trust them, even after all that had happened? Jessica's eyes softened when she saw Emma's hesitation. "You don't have to if you're not ready. I just thought it would be nice to hang out. No pressure, I promise." Emma looked between Jessica, Megan, and Amanda. The three of them were standing there, waiting for her answer, and for the first time, Emma didn't feel like she had to choose between standing alone or letting them pull her back into a world that had once been full of hurt. It felt like the beginning of something new, but it also felt fragile. "I'll come," Emma said, surprising herself. "But just for a bit. I've got some homework to do later." Megan and Amanda exchanged glances before smiling. "Of course, we won't keep you long," Megan said, her voice warm. As they walked together to the cafeteria, Emma couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and caution. She had been so used to the wariness of high school cliques, the drama, the alliances that were often as shifting as sand. Now, it felt like she was being offered a place in a new world, but it wasn't a world she fully understood yet. The cafeteria was as bustling as usual, filled with the noise of students talking, laughing, and eating. Emma felt a little out of place, like she was stepping into an unfamiliar territory. The three girls led the way to a corner table near the window, where they had obviously claimed their spot in the cafeteria's social ecosystem. As they sat down, Emma looked around the room, noticing how different things seemed. She had always been on the outside looking in, but now she was sitting at the table with the people who used to make her feel invisible. The dynamics were different, quieter, as if everyone was still figuring out what this shift in their group meant. "So, how's your week been?" Jessica asked, breaking the silence. She was looking at Emma with a level of curiosity, but it wasn't the kind of curiosity that felt judgmental. It was genuine interest, and that threw Emma off guard. "It's been good," Emma said, feeling her shoulders relax. "Busy, but good. I've been catching up on some assignments and stuff." Megan leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "Same. I swear, the teachers have it out for us this semester. So much homework. It's ridiculous." Emma laughed, a soft, genuine sound. Tell me about it. I feel like I'm drowning in papers. The conversation flowed smoothly, without the awkward pauses that Emma had been anticipating. The girls were talking about classes, the upcoming school play, and a new movie that had just come out. It was easy, like they had all been friends for years instead of the tense strangers they had been only a week ago. For the first time in a long while, Emma found herself laughing, really laughing, at the way Megan was reenacting a scene from the movie, exaggerating every detail. Amanda joined in, and even Jessica seemed more relaxed than Emma had ever seen her. It was strange. Emma had spent so long avoiding these interactions, convinced that her place was somewhere far away from these girls. But now, with each passing minute, she realized that this new version of their relationship, this tentative beginning of something different, felt real. But even as the laughter continued, Emma couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that had settled in the pit of her stomach. The past was still there, lingering in the background like a shadow. It wasn't enough to simply forget everything that had happened, no matter how genuine their attempts at change seemed. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Jessica, Megan, and Amanda stood up, gathering their things. "We should do this again sometime," Jessica said with a smile. "It was nice, just hanging out." Emma nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, it was. Thanks for inviting me." As they walked away, Emma couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. She wasn't sure what to expect next. Was this the beginning of a new friendship, or would it all unravel the moment something went wrong? She had no answers, only questions. But for the first time, the questions didn't feel as heavy. They felt like the natural part of this new chapter in her life. As she walked to her next class, Emma realized that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't focused on the past. She was thinking about the future, about the possibilities of what might come next. And that, she decided, was a good place to be. The days that followed the lunch with Jessica, Megan, and Amanda were filled with small moments of progress. Emma wasn't ready to declare everything was completely different, but there was a noticeable shift in her interactions with the girls. They greeted her in the hallways, smiled at her in class, and made casual conversation between periods. It was subtle, but it was enough to make Emma feel like she wasn't just another face in the crowd anymore. Yet, despite the light-hearted conversations and the growing sense of camaraderie, Emma still couldn't shake the unease that lingered in the back of her mind. She had forgiven them for their past actions, at least, she was trying to, but that didn't mean she had forgotten. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and every time Jessica laughed or Megan shared a story, Emma found herself holding back, wondering if it was all too good to be true. That Friday afternoon, after a long week of tentative peace, the tipping point finally arrived. It began in the parking lot, as Emma was heading to her car after school. She was halfway across the lot when she heard a familiar voice call out to her. "Emma, wait up." Emma turned around, surprised to see Jessica jogging toward her, a wide smile on her face. Megan and Amanda were a few steps behind, their expressions relaxed but cautious. "Hey, what's up?" Emma asked, trying to mask the knot in her stomach. "We were just talking," Jessica said, catching her breath. "We're going to hang out tonight, maybe catch a movie or something. You should come with us. We thought it'd be fun." Emma froze. The invitation was unexpected. Not because she didn't want to go, it wasn't that, but because it felt like a step into unfamiliar territory. Hanging out with the girls was one thing, but actually spending time outside of school, outside the public eye, felt like a whole new level of vulnerability. "I don't know," Emma said slowly. "I've got some stuff to do tonight." Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment, but then she recovered. "No worries. We just thought it'd be fun to hang out, But if you can't make it, that's fine." Emma felt the hesitation in her chest. It was hard to explain why she was hesitant. Everything inside her screamed that this was a moment she couldn't miss, that maybe it was time to finally let down her guard. But the fear of being disappointed, the fear of things going wrong, held her back. "I'll think about it," Emma said, offering a half-hearted smile. "I'll let you know." Jessica nodded, seemingly satisfied with the response. "Okay, cool. We'll be at the mall around 7. You know where to find us." The three girls waved and walked off, leaving Emma standing there, alone with her thoughts. She couldn't help but replay the conversation in her head. It wasn't like she hadn't been offered invitations before, but this one felt different. It felt like a genuine attempt to include her, not just to fit her into a group for the sake of appearances. But what if it didn't work out? What if this was just a temporary phase, and the moment she showed up, she would feel like the odd one out again? The doubt crept in, pulling her back. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. She pulled it out to find a text from Jessica. "Jessica, just wanted to say, it's totally okay if you can't make it tonight. Just thought it'd be fun. Hope we can hang out again soon no matter what." Emma stared at the screen for a few seconds. Jessica's words were kind, not pressuring her at all, but it didn't stop the swirl of emotions inside her. She wanted to go. She really did. But the past few years of being an outsider had conditioned her to be cautious, to hold back. She wasn't used to being this vulnerable, this open to change. After a long pause, Emma typed back a reply. "Emma, I'll be there. 7 at the mall, right?" Almost instantly, a reply came through. "Jessica, yay. Can't wait." With a deep breath, Emma slid her phone back into her pocket. She didn't know what tonight would bring, but she had made her decision. She was going to take a step forward, to see what this was all about. Maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. As she got into her car and drove home, Emma felt a mix of excitement and anxiety bubbling inside her. The familiar nervousness crept in, but it was accompanied by a flicker of hope, something that had been absent from her life for a long time. Maybe she was ready to take this next step. Maybe she could finally leave the past behind and embrace the possibility of something different. That evening, as the clock ticked closer to 7, Emma stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. She had never been one to overthink her appearance, but tonight felt different. She changed her shirt 3 times, trying to find something that made her feel confident without trying too hard. After a few more minutes of indecision, she decided on a simple black top and jeans. It was casual, comfortable, and it was the best she could do in the moment. As she drove to the mall, Emma's nerves mounted. The night ahead could go in so many directions. She could end up having a great time and finally feel like she belonged, or she could once again feel like an outsider, just standing there, hoping to fit in. When she arrived at the mall, she texted Jessica to let her know she was there. A moment later, Jessica responded with a smiley face emoji and told her to meet at the food court. Emma walked through the mall, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her mind. The soft hum of the crowd around her helped to ease her nerves. It was strange how normal everything felt, even though she was walking toward a group of people she never thought she'd be hanging out with. She spotted Jessica first, standing with Megan and Amanda near the center of the food court. They were laughing, and for the first time, it wasn't forced or awkward. Emma felt a slight sense of relief, maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. As she approached the table, Jessica waved at her with a big smile. "Hey, Emma. Over here." The girls greeted her warmly, and they all ordered food before sitting down to chat. It wasn't a life-changing moment, but it felt like a step forward, an authentic one. Emma found herself laughing with them, contributing to the conversation, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was a part of something. It wasn't perfect. It was still a work in progress, and Emma knew it. But in that moment, she realized that sometimes, the most significant moments in life aren't the ones that come with grand gestures or big breakthroughs. Sometimes, they're the small, quiet moments where you take a step forward, even when you don't know exactly where it will lead. And for Emma, that was enough. The night at the mall turned out to be more than Emma had expected. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough or an overnight transformation, but it was a step. A simple, meaningful step into a world that had once felt out of reach. The girls had spent the evening in the food court, talking about everything from school gossip to their favorite hobbies. It was like a normal night between friends, no drama, no tension. They talked and laughed, their conversations flowing naturally. Emma didn't feel out of place. For once, she felt like she was right where she belonged. As the night wore on, Emma found herself more and more at ease. Megan had even offered her some popcorn to share, and Amanda had told an embarrassing story from her childhood that had everyone in stitches. Jessica, for the first time, wasn't the person who felt like she was trying too hard to be nice. She was just herself. When the night finally came to an end, and Emma said her goodbyes, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was a good night. The kind of night that left her with a quiet confidence, a feeling that maybe this could be the start of something real. Walking out of the mall, Emma looked up at the stars. They seemed brighter than usual, as though the world itself had shifted with her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready for it. The following week, school felt different. The familiar hum of the hallway chatter no longer felt like a constant reminder of what she had endured. Emma's confidence had grown, and with it, a sense of belonging that she hadn't known was possible. The girls, especially Jessica, Megan, and Amanda, made it clear that they wanted her to be a part of their group, but it wasn't just about fitting in. It was about trust, about building something real and authentic. Emma had learned that it wasn't about the past. It was about moving forward. She wasn't defined by the mistakes or the struggles of yesterday. She was defined by the person she was becoming, and that person was strong, resilient, and capable of growth. But there were moments when she found herself reflecting on her journey. The way her life had been before, the loneliness, the isolation, sometimes felt like a distant memory, like a version of herself that didn't exist anymore. And yet, those experiences had shaped who she was today. They had made her more aware of her own strength, more appreciative of the friendships she had begun to build. By the end of the week, Emma found herself laughing and joking with the girls between classes, sitting at lunch with them, and even sharing little inside jokes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had found her place, not because she had been accepted, but because she had earned her way into this new chapter of her life through her actions, her resilience, and her willingness to move past the hurt. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, still times when Emma questioned if she was truly a part of this world or if she was simply an outsider masquerading as someone who belonged. But each day, those doubts became easier to dismiss. Each day, she grew stronger in herself, in her ability to trust, and in her belief that change was possible. One afternoon, as Emma sat with the girls, talking about the upcoming school dance, Jessica leaned over and whispered to her, "You're a lot stronger than I thought, you know." Emma blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jessica continued, "you've been through so much, and you're still standing. You're here with us. That's more than most people can say." For a moment, Emma was silent. She hadn't really thought about it like that. She hadn't really thought about how far she had come since that first day at school, when everything felt impossible. But Jessica's words hit her in a way that made her realize just how much she had changed. "I guess I didn't realize it either," Emma admitted, her voice soft. "But I'm starting to." Jessica smiled warmly. "You should. Because you've come a long way, Emma." Emma smiled back, feeling a sense of warmth that she hadn't known in a long time. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And she was starting to realize that it was okay to let go of the past and embrace the future. That night, Emma sat down to write in her journal. She hadn't written in a while, but something about this moment made her feel like it was time. She wanted to capture how she was feeling, how far she had come, how much she had learned, and how much more she still had to discover. She began to write. "I think I'm finally starting to understand. Life isn't about avoiding the hurt or pretending everything's perfect. It's about how you rise after the fall, how you keep going even when it seems impossible. I've been knocked down more times than I can count, but somehow, I'm still standing. And that's something worth remembering. She paused, reading the words. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt at peace with who she was. She wasn't perfect. She didn't have all the answers. But she was growing, and that was enough. With a deep breath, Emma closed her journal and placed it on her desk. She turned off her lamp and settled into bed, a smile on her face. Tomorrow was a new day, and she was ready for it. Emma reflects on her journey and the growth she's experienced. After a pivotal night out with Jessica, Megan, and Amanda, she begins to feel like she belongs, not just in their group, but in her own life. She has learned that it's not about the past, it's about who she's becoming. With the support of her new friends and a stronger sense of self, Emma looks forward to the future with hope and confidence. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience, self-discovery, and the importance of embracing change. Emma has learned that, while the past may shape us, it doesn't define us. The future is ours to create, and with every new day, Emma is building something worth fighting for. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?